This right here is the GTR Mini PC from B-Link. Now, you may not have heard B-Link. I've used them in the past in businesses and put them in a lot of places. They're great mini PCs. Here's some unboxing shots just so you can kind of see really high quality. I highly recommend them, especially for compute. The compute on these systems are really good, and we're going to get into the benchmarks just to show you that. But you'll also notice there's something really interesting about these Ryzen 7000 mobile chip that's in there. Is APUs have finally gotten to a spot where we can game, like legit game. So we're gonna actually do some like Diablo 4 and Cyberpunk on this, which is kind of nuts that we're to that point where these not necessarily will replace a gaming PC, but possibly be as a cheap alternative for those that don't want to mess around with something like I have back here with a full-blown GPU and all the shenanigans that go with having a gaming PC. Some people just like, hey, I just want to play these games at 60 FPS at 1080p, and that's fine. And that's where this box steps in. So let's get on the desktop, explore what it's capable of. Now, with any new system, obviously you want to be updating the BIOS, especially AMD systems. Typically, look for a BIOS update if you get an RDNA system, like the RDNA 3 here. There was some good updates that did increase my performance. Two, there was an update shell here. We just put this on a FAT32 blank USB drive right on the root like this, and then flash it, and then that. Here's this process. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward it. I'm going to press F7 to get to the boot menu and boot this USB drive. That's my USB drive right there. Now, I did run into an issue just running the flash.nsh, so I had to manually type that in, but a pretty simple fix. All right, process is complete. That took roughly about 4 minutes. All right, and this is the basic AMI BIOS that comes with it. I really like the old school design just because I hate all the new graphics you see in other brands where AMI is basically one of the OGs of creating a lot of just really solid BIOS. And a lot of times these newer versions of BIOS put too much fancy graphics and they're hard to navigate around, where this just is kind of right here and it's just perfect. Now let's get into the benchmarking of this system. If we look at just the general summary, this is what we're dealing with. Now, there is one thing I need to specify in this video, especially if you're watching this like a year from now. The 7000 series of AMD, the mobile processing right here, is not really available to the general public yet, at least not very much. And you can kind of see that also on the website. You can see the mobile processors. They don't even have the drivers available on AMD.com. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. And when we're looking at these benchmarks, keep that in mind, because that means when new drivers come out, these numbers will go up. There are going to be a lot of just general optimizations that will happen. And if you get one of these right as they're released, just know you might run into little bugs. Like I think when I was playing Diablo 4, which we'll show here in a little bit, what I noticed was like during rain and things, I got some stutter, some frame times that were a little bit inconsistent, but I know that would be more of a driver issue and not necessarily anything with the actual hardware itself. But right here's what we got. We got Windows 11 Professionals, what comes with this, 32 gigs of memory, and the GPU has about 4 gigs dedicated to it for the internal GPU. And this is just a brief summary that I kind of wanted to hit first before we go into the actual benchmarks. I went ahead and used Geekbench, and then also I wanted to pull in like a Time Spy report and kind of compare this to certain processors and other mobile systems I've had in the past, just so you can kind of get an idea of how far these APUs have come. Because really 1080p gaming using an APU and not even needing a GPU anymore is possible. So let's talk about that, because that's really the thing I see about this. First off, let's just get this out of the way. For the CPU and the compute, how are these systems? I knew before I took this one, I've used B-Link for years in the past for business clients. They're great little systems. They last a good while, especially for their form factor, and they are extremely performant, just as performant as any other desktop. So these scores are really amazing, especially for the single core scores. I know Geekbench 6 comparatively, 2500 is equivalent to a 12th gen Intel desktop PC. So the fact it's scoring above that at a 2600 is really, really good. And you can see some of my old Geekbench 5 scores where it's considerably less with these 2-year-old machines comparing to like some 10th gen Intels in here. This Valve Juniper, this is the Steam Deck and what it did for processing power. That's a RDNA 2 chip, and you can see, wow, quite a big difference there. But obviously, let's move on to 3D Mark. This one was really interesting, and I put 2 scores up here for comparison. This isn't apples to apples, but I wanted to first go with the 10th gen i7 with integrated graphics. Now, most people know Intel's integrated graphics isn't very good. I know on the 12th gen, it's gotten considerably better, but this is a 10th gen laptop I got earlier this year with integrated graphics, and you can see it only scored like a 460, where this one scored well over 3,000. So this puts 1080p gaming really on the table for this one. Now, it's not a complete replacement for a full-blown gaming PC with the GPU. So if you're doing like 1440p gaming, or you want really high frame rate gaming, let's say you do competitive shooters and you need 140 plus frames, obviously you're not going to be wanting an APU. But for those 1080p 60 hertz gamers out there, like myself, which I don't game that much these days, this would actually be sufficient. Now, I can put it up against this 2080 Super Notebook one, which is a mobile NVIDIA chip, and you can see it scored about half of that, which is really shocking because this notebook was $4,000. So that's respectable. I really thought these results were really amazing. So let's move on to the actual gameplay and launch into like a Diablo 4. All right, so where this is going to shine is the 1080p 60 FPS gaming space. Now, Diablo 4 is pretty well optimized, and I find if you're going to deal with an APU like this, like RDNA 2 or RDNA 3 like this system, you can really take advantage of FSR and really crank up those FPS and even get into probably well into the hundreds if it's a little bit older system that does support FSR. Now, Diablo 4 is pretty new, and I am using the high-res pack as well with this install, so let's see what we get. Now, right now, I'm capping this around 60 FPS, so we're probably going well into the 70s, I would say. The big thing that I worry about is you see those little graphs as I kind of move around. Any kind of spikes you see is inconsistent. That makes jittery gameplay. So that's the big thing that you got to watch out for moving in and out, particle effects, those types of things. Let's get into some battle. So right here, you can see the particle flames, and it does actually see some jitteriness. Not that much. Definitely doable. It's not going to affect your gameplay that much. It just is a little bit annoying when you get into this section with a lot of particle. You can see it with the rain and the fire both going on. You can see a little bit of drops. But let's take out our FPS cap. This is vertical sync. You're going to start to see screen tearing here, which is totally normal. But let's turn off vertical sync, and then that will uncap our FPS. See what we're getting. And still above or right in that 60 frames with all these effects going on. Now, you do see the screen tearing with vertical sync off, so please ignore that. I just wanted to see how high the FPS will get with the FSR. See right here, it maintains that steady around 60 FPS as I imagine. Now, let's remove all of FSR and just go to what you'd see in just standard systems without anything. So this would be really telling on a game that doesn't have FSR capabilities. So down here, I'm just going to take this, turn it to off, and save that. And we're going to see a pretty substantial frame drop. So going from 60s to about 40s at 1080p with some pretty substantial stutter. Let's see what we have as we run around and come back to this little spot. I always find some good frame drops in the rain and fire at the same time. Let's drop off. Yeah, that's a pretty big difference. I would say this is somewhat playable, but at the same time, not as nearly as smooth experience with FSR and hitting at least 60 frames for me to really game consistently. If it was a smaller screen, maybe a handheld, you could get away with 40, 45 frames. But big screen like this right now at 1080p, I can really notice that it doesn't feel 100%, but still technically doable even without FSR. Now, even on the older games, you're not going to run into any issues. I just wanted to show this one and then load up some Cyberpunk as well. Now, Cyberpunk is one of those really interesting games because we have a lot to test on it. They have a new expansion coming out, and they updated their system requirements to reflect this. Just to play at 30 FPS at 1080p, it says you need at least a 1060 and a 6th gen processor for i7s or a Ryzen 5 first gen. That's kind of insane that that's the absolute bare minimum running at low presets. So as an APU, you'd think this just wouldn't work. And in most APUs, this absolutely would not, especially like 10th gen Intels or anything before then. So let's stretch its wheels. I just want to put this up first and then come into here and show you kind of my settings that I'm putting on here. We're going to do a medium preset. We should probably put that down to low for an APU and do FSR to give this the best possibility of having the greatest result. Now, there's some other stuff we could actually do as well. We could do dynamic resolution scaling and then come over to our video tab and then put this down to like a 720p and then scale it up. And that's going to give us even more FPS. So I kind of want to just leave it at low and just do FSR and not change anything and just give you the base 1080p, but just know we can get higher FPS by scaling up from a 720p. But right now, I just want to kind of give a good baseline for you. And here we go. Now, keep an eye on the frame times as well. Any spikes you see over here in the top left, that's actually giving you a little bit of jitter. So keep an eye on it. Getting in the frames of about 40 to 50, about what I'd expect for a pretty demanding game like this. And as we move outside, it's obviously capping around 60 FPS right there. That's pretty impressive. This game's definitely playable on an APU, which I didn't think those words would ever come out of my mouth, considering how many bugs it had at launch day. And there we go. We got an average of 51 FPS, minimum of about 14 in some spots where it dropped. Overall, really amazing. And the thing I really want you to pay close attention on is, again, I can't emphasize enough, this is going to get a lot better as these graphics drivers get, they evolve and mature, because this is the very early days. This is probably the very first release of these drivers, and I know there's a lot of optimizations they have to do, and I think that's going to probably smooth out all those frame times we talked about and give us a little bit of a bump in FPS. So for me, I'm really excited because I love to drop GPUs all together, and I didn't even tell you the best part about this box. Now, what I didn't mention about this box, as I did all these benchmarks, I anticipated a lot of sound coming through these fans because it's pretty compact in here and these exhausts. But the thing is, I had to turn off my desktop PCs back here because I couldn't even make it out. I couldn't even hear the sound over those PCs, which is kind of insane because that's pretty quiet back there. But this thing was even quieter. So that was kind of shocking, especially when I was gaming. I could hear it kick up a little bit if I really put my ear to it, but for the most part, couldn't hear it. The only downside I would say for a mini PC like this compared to the big dogs back here, other than performance, GPU, cost, all those things, is whenever you could ram all that into a small box, you do get less of a lifespan. So a traditional desktop will last longer than a mini PC, and something to take into consideration. But I'm starting to get to a point in my life where I don't really need the latest hotness with all the whiz-bang features, and something like this I would actually use and will use compared to a traditional desktop, which kind of sounds like blasphemy coming from me, but I'm to a point where I'm like, this does everything I want it to do. It has just a processing powerhouse. I can get a ton of work done on it and even do some gaming. So let me know down in the comments what you guys think of this, and I'll see you in the next one.